Hi everybody, Jen Serravallo here. I hope you're all having a great summer so far. I saw some people are already heading back to school. I'm in the Northeast. We have a good another month ahead of us of wonderful days in the summer in the sun and playing with the kids at the beach and all that. So wherever you are in the country or around the world, whatever your schedule looks like, I hope that you're enjoying your summer and looking forward to what's coming next. So today we're doing a 3-day live event. Today's the first day of 3, and our focus is going to be about read aloud. I think this is a great time in the summer to start thinking a little bit about the books that you want to bring to your classroom to help build community and help teach different skills for reading and for science and for social studies and whatever it is that you're working on. And I usually start off talking about read aloud as a comparison to the kind of read alouds, read aloud lessons as being a comparison to the kind of read alouds that I remember from when I was a child. My second grade teacher, Mrs. Nichols, with the best voice. She did this, she brought the characters to life. I remember sitting at her feet and listening to her reading James and the Giant Peach and all the different characters that we would hear through her voice. And the lights were dimmed and sometimes we were braiding each other's hair. Like that kind of like dreamy after recess kind of falling into the story, which is a beautiful time, and I highly recommend that kind of a read aloud too. But when I talk about a read aloud lesson, what I'm talking about is something that we really plan ahead of time. We think about what are we going to teach kids to know and to be able to do as they engage with the story. We're making plans about what we're going to be thinking aloud for them to help demonstrate some of the ways that we process and make sense of the story or of the text that we're reading. And we're inviting kids to interact with each other and to interact with the text. So I would love to hear from you in the chat box. I'm seeing some people say hi. Hi, Bridget. Hi, Gail. Hi, Amy. I'd love to see what your questions are, what you're thinking about with regard to read aloud lessons. I was actually doing a full day webinar workshop a couple weeks ago, and one of the teachers, it was a middle school teacher, she said she doesn't really use read aloud as a lesson type in her classroom, and she was excited to give it a try. And that surprised me because I feel like read aloud is such a foundational, critical, daily lesson type to include. So I'm curious to hear from you all, if what your grade level is and how and when you use read aloud in your classroom. I really think read aloud is something that you can use across the day, multiple times a day even, as we move from subject to subject. In an elementary school classroom, a single teacher is responsible for teaching English language arts, where we might be reading fiction and stories. We might be reading nonfiction and teaching them skills and strategies for engaging with nonfiction. Then we might move into science, where we're exploring, electricity and wires and batteries. And then we might move into social studies, where we're learning about ancient Egypt, right? And no matter what subject we're working on, if we can find a really engaging, interesting text to read to children, and we can read it ahead of time and plan what do we want kids to know and what do we want them to be able to do, it could offer them a way to think about their own thinking, to learn about how to approach texts on their own through the use of comprehension skills and strategies. And we can highlight specific knowledge and vocabulary goals, things that we want them to take away. And here's the thing, I think we should be highlighting knowledge and vocabulary goals in all texts, even in English language arts. It's not just for skills and strategies. And we want to make sure that in science and social studies, we're teaching kids really how to read texts, not just teaching them the content. So I think it's a yes and, right? It's a both and. Everything, all of these things, knowledge, skills, strategies should be in both ELA and science and social studies. So I thought I could give you a few examples. Does that sound good? Let me just read the chat box real quick. How much time, Stephanie's asking, how much time per day would you plan for this particular type of read aloud? That's a great question. I think a good lesson is around 15 minutes, give or take. You have to see what your kid's attention span is, but 15 minutes, give or take. And sometimes I like to tag on an extra other lesson type that I call a conversation lesson. And those might be either that the whole class is sitting around in a full circle and we're engaging in a conversation about this text or maybe other texts we've read recently. Or I could send kids off into small groups and they could have little book club conversations about the text that we've all just engaged with together. And I call those conversation lessons because I'm not just telling them to talk, I'm teaching them how to talk. So I'm giving them skills and strategies related to speaking and listening skills as well. So 15 minutes for the read aloud part, but I often piggyback, maybe a couple times a week, piggyback on an opportunity for conversation to speak to that as well. And Kara's asking, daily is the goal as a lesson? Definitely. I think at least once a day, at least. Like I said, you might actually find bringing read aloud multiple times a day across your subject areas would be something that you'd want to do. Oh, Teacher McManus is asking a great question. How many times do you stop to model a think aloud? Let me get into that. Let me talk a little bit about how do we plan for this and what are my considerations when I'm looking at a text, and then I'll try to talk about that frequency, like how often am I stopping and pausing. Okay, so what did I bring? I brought this picture book, Island Born. Beautiful picture book by Junot Diaz, a few years old, I think. Also translated into Spanish. It's called Lola in Spanish, the Spanish version. And this is a beautiful picture book about a little girl in New York City who's asked to talk about her home and where she came from. And she has a little exploration going around her community and within her family to learn more about her roots and kind of where she came from. So as I begin reading this story, I'll just read the first page to you and we can think together, what does this text lend itself to teach? We're going to be thinking about skills and strategies, and we're also going to be thinking about knowledge and vocabulary, okay? Skills and strategies, knowledge and vocabulary. Every kid in Lola's school was from somewhere else. Hers was the school of faraway places. Mai was from a city so big that it was like its own country. India and Camilla were from a stony village at the tippy top of the world. Mateo had lived in a desert so hot even the cactus fainted. Nu was born in a jungle famous for its tigers and its poets, and Lola was from the island. So that's only a page, but can you join in the chat box and tell me already what opportunities are you seeing here? It doesn't really get us right into a scene, does it? So it's not like we're visualizing a moment. It's not starting off the story like that. What do you think? I'm thinking a little bit about how the author begins by sort of setting the scene, setting the stage a little bit. Like I can visualize maybe a classroom filled with children. Kristen's noticing vocabulary, absolutely. What words are you noticing already that might be ones we'd want to highlight in our lesson? There's vocabulary and there's actually figurative language too, right? I see things like the school of faraway places. That's very literary, isn't it? And probably, it's kind of figurative, might go over some kids' heads. We might want to pause and kind of think a little bit about that. What else? Desert, jungle. And one of the things I'm thinking about when I'm choosing to highlight vocabulary in a fictional text is this word really key to understanding the text? So there's going to be tons and tons of words, but as I'm going through, I'm thinking, do I need this word to be able to move forward and to understand this text? Yeah, Teacher McManus is saying, how about author's craft? It's a beautiful one to return to. That's another wonderful reason why you might want to include read aloud in your day, to return to it as a writing example. Right? As we look at the writer's craft here, we have sort of this repetitious rhythm almost, where I'm introducing a character and I'm telling something about them. And then I love this little sentence clip at the bottom that begins with and Lola was from the island. It's like, dun, dun, dun. What else are we going to learn next? Right? So there's a lot of craft in that, and you can kind of point that out and notice that with them. I'm also thinking about, the skills and strategies that I might want to offer kids. So this is sort of like, what do I need to know about? Like understanding that the world is large, that there are different climates and different countries, and that people come from different places, and then they can meet together in a city, and there's this sort of melting pot or something, right, of that's happening within this classroom, and they're going to learn about each other's cultures. There's a lot of concepts and kind of stuff to understand just on this first page. And in terms of skills and strategies, I might want to think about how do I visualize when I first get into a story? How do I get myself into a story and really engage with that story? So some of you might be thinking, When I'm trying to introduce to kids, the kinds of skills and strategies that I want to be highlighting for them, you can think about what it is that you do yourself as a reader. You could think, well, how did I engage? How did I get into this story? How did I visualize? Maybe it's picturing something on each and every line. Maybe it's asking yourself questions as you read. Some of you might also have this book, my reading strategies book, and this one's organized according to goal. And one little hack, if you have this book, is that when you find a strategy that you think works really well, let's see if I have one that works really well with this. I'm looking in the second chapter, which is the engagement motivation chapter. And I'm gonna look at the kind of the table of contents within this chapter, and I'm looking for something that's gonna help them to visualize and get into the book. Maybe something like visualize to focus. Here's 225. That one would work. And this strategy says, create a picture in your mind that shifts and changes. Try to experience what the author's describing. Ask yourself, what do I see, hear, feel, taste, and smell? Pretty simple strategy. Then the hack is at the bottom of the page are some prompts that you can use right then and there to prompt your readers or to think out loud. So for example, one of them is make the picture move. Another one is, what do you see, right? So when I'm planning my read aloud, after I've previewed the text and I found skills and strategies and vocabulary, I'm going to actually take a sticky note and I'm going to put this right on the page, and I'm going to mark it with what I'm going to say to pause the students and get them to engage in some way. So it could be pausing to get them to talk to their partner, pausing to get them to act something out, pausing to get them to stopping and jotting something, or pausing to watch me think out loud. So I might just write here, think aloud, and I might say, I'm picturing this classroom filled with children who are excitedly thinking about all the different places that they come from. Or if I want to go with that's the visualizing one, I might instead go with a vocabulary one. I'm pausing here and I'm thinking, this word desert is a new word for me, maybe, right? It says in the sentence, desert so hot even the cactus fainted. So I'm picturing a very dry place with very few plants, all right? And even a cactus, which is used to dry weather, is wilting in the heat of this place. So I might pause and model how I'm figuring out a vocabulary word from context. But the point is that I'm planning it ahead of time, and I'm jotting for myself a little note that goes with the skill or the strategy, or highlights the vocabulary or the content, the concepts, the knowledge that I want them to be able to learn. I do this though across the day, right? I do this in my science class and my social studies class. Let's just take another example. Like, let's say I've got, do you all know this series, Two Truths and a Lie? There's a whole series of these. They're kind of fun. There's, I think, 3 little mini chapters within each larger chapter, larger section. And 2 of them are telling something true about history, and one of them's fibbing somehow. Sometimes it's a big fib, like it's totally made up, and sometimes it's kind of almost true, which I think is the best way to play Two Truths and a Lie. It's almost true, but it's just got a little bit of a twist to it that makes it not true. So let's say I'm reading this chapter here where I'm talking about, I think you pronounce this Onesimus, and the fight against smallpox. And so this chapter is all about the history of vaccinations and how, I didn't know this until I read this, but apparently it was a common practice in Africa that they would take a small amount, this is kind of gross, but like a small amount of pus from a smallpox sore, and they would use that to inoculate healthy people, right? That's basically how vaccines work. They take a small amount of the virus and they put it into people that are healthy, and then your body learns to fight it. So when you encounter it in real life, you don't have a problem. So this idea was actually taken, or we might say stolen, and credited to this guy named Cotton Mather, who is a minister, and he says he was a scientist, a witch hunter, and a slave owner. And so this guy actually spread the word about this practice, and it talks about how there was a lot of distrust and people were not really sure about it. You could understand where that would come from, right? And then as you get to pages 18 and 19, if you can see this, but there's a lot happening on the page. We've got this kind of primary source. We've got this little call out box, we've got this sidebar of information. And so I might say, I'm looking to teach the kids in my class about the content. I want them to know about the history. I want them to know the dates when this happened and understand the timeline. I want them to notice or understand the significance of disease and how disease impacts communities throughout history. That's the content. I also want them to understand vocabulary, like what inoculation means or what smallpox is. And I want them to learn skills and strategies, like how do I handle a primary source? How do I handle a sidebar? So that when they encounter these things again in the next book that they're reading, they're gonna know what to do. So again, I could think, well, what do I do? What do I do when I encounter these different kinds of text features? How do I integrate those with the main text? How do I deal with them on their own? If you have the strategies book, you might go to, for example, this is in the text features section. Consider sidebars as sections. And there's a handy, I just saw Tiffany joined. This is one of Tiffany's charts. Hi, Tiffany. You can check out this strategy that helps you think about a sidebar as its own section, understand what that sidebar is mostly about, and integrate that with the running text on the page. Or maybe I'm going to go to this strategy, which is all about understanding primary sources. And how do I read a primary source? And what do I do with the information that I get from that primary source? So again, I'm thinking knowledge, vocabulary, skills, and strategies. It doesn't matter if it's ELA, science, social studies, and these read-alouds can happen across content. So I'm realizing I'm almost at time, or I'm over time actually, but I could talk on and on and on about this. Someone earlier asked, how much do I pause? So the number of think alouds and stop and jots and turn and talk opportunities, it depends a lot on the attention span of your kids, how dense the text is that you're reading. But I think there's a balance between stopping too little and that there's so much text that goes by that they're not dealing with, that they lose track of the meaning, and stopping too often that you start to lose the steam, right? You start to lose the energy of the story. It really interrupts. So I would say maybe like once every couple pages in a picture book, something around those lines. In a nonfiction text, maybe once a paragraph or once every 2 paragraphs or so. You don't want to, again, do it too much that it interrupts. So you have to see how dense the text is, how long the whole thing is overall. Maybe in a 15-minute read aloud, we're going for, I don't know, 5 stopping places at some point. And those stopping places could be a blend of thinking out loud for kids so that you're modeling those skills and strategies, or you're modeling how you're making sense of the text and how you're understanding the vocabulary, or that you are asking the kids to engage with each other or to engage with the text in some way. Darlene's asking, could Island Born be used with middle school students studying Latin America? Thank you for talking about middle school and bringing in read-alouds. There's such richness in picture books that are maybe written for younger children, but you could absolutely use that as a launching place. It actually gets into Trujillo, and like there's a lot of history of the Dominican Republic, and it's actually quite meaty. You could actually layer in a middle school lens to this book very easily. Absolutely. Do I introduce a strategy and teach it first during a whole class lesson and then bring it into the read aloud? It could be. It could be that I remind kids, oh, we learned this earlier, let's try it right here. Or it could also be that that's their first opportunity to practice this strategy. And, and speaking of that, I don't just teach one strategy over and over and over and over again. It's what the text is calling for. So it's likely that throughout one read aloud, I'm going to be modeling through my think aloud or asking kids to engage with more than one strategy. Right? On that page, when there's a primary source, we're doing a strategy that helps with a primary source. But later on, I might teach them a summarizing strategy because we're at the end of a section, and that's just a good practice for readers to do, to summarize, to make sure I really understand, what it is that I just read about. So today and for the rest of the week, Wednesday and Thursday, I'll be coming on live. We'll be having a little chat. Thank you so much for engaging with me in the comments. It really makes me feel less alone in my room, and it lets me hear what you're thinking about and what you're wondering about and how I can be helpful. I have a chapter in this new book, Teaching Reading Across the Day, about read aloud lessons. It's one of 9 types of lessons that I talk about. Conversation lessons is another one. I mentioned those earlier. And so tomorrow and Thursday, we're going to be talking about read aloud. By Thursday, I'll talk about 2 other lesson types that I also share in there to help kids with complex text. So some other options beyond read aloud. So thank you all for joining me. Again, have a great summer. I hope you see you tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Take care, everybody.